My husband laughed when I walked into that courtroom alone. Not a small laugh, a full, shoulder-shaking laugh that he didn't even bother to hide behind his hand. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something, and the two of them smiled at each other like they were watching a child try to parallel park for the first time. I was 31 years old, standing in a provincial courthouse in Kitchener, Ontario, wearing the blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop on Keene Street because I couldn't afford anything new. I had a manila folder, a legal pad, and 7 years of marriage I was about to fight for without a single lawyer in my corner. He thought that was funny. He wouldn't be laughing for long. I need to go back to the beginning because none of this makes sense unless you understand what I gave up. I met my husband when I was 23, fresh out of my undergrad at Waterloo, working as a junior analyst at an insurance brokerage in downtown Toronto. He was 30, charming in the way that men are when they've had just enough success to feel confident but not enough to feel arrogant. He wore nice watches, he opened doors, he remembered things, the name of my childhood dog, the fact that I hated cilantro, the anniversary of my mother's surgery. We dated for 2 years and then got married in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. My sister flew in from Vancouver. His parents drove from Mississauga. It rained in the morning and cleared up by noon, and my mother cried during the vows, and I remember thinking that I had done something right. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that the man I married had a very particular way of measuring people. Not by their character, not by their effort, by their utility. What they could do for him, what they made him look like, what they added to the life he was building for himself. For the first 4 years, I was useful. I was working, contributing to the mortgage on our semi-detached in Waterloo, splitting bills, building something. Then I got pregnant, and we made a decision together, or at least I thought it was together, that I would take a step back from my career to raise our daughter. He was moving up quickly at his firm. It made financial sense, he said. Temporary, he said. Our daughter was born in March. She had his dark hair and my stubborn mouth, and I loved her so completely that I didn't even notice when temporary started becoming permanent. By the time she was 2, I had been out of the workforce long enough that going back felt like starting over. The brokerage I'd worked for had restructured. The contacts I'd had were stale. My husband kept saying, "Just 1 more year, just until she starts school, just until we get settled." And I kept believing him, because that's what you do when you trust someone. He stopped opening doors somewhere around year 5, started coming home later, started speaking to me in a tone he never would have used when we first met. Not cruel, exactly, just dismissive, like I was staff, like the things I said were probably fine, but not really worth engaging with. I made excuses for it. He was stressed at work, the promotion had been delayed, his father was sick. There was always something. The morning I found out about her, I was packing our daughter's lunch for JK. I had the radio on. I was cutting the crusts off a peanut butter sandwich. We used sunflower butter because of the school's nut policy, and his phone buzzed on the counter because he'd forgotten it. I wasn't going to look. I genuinely wasn't. But it buzzed again, and I saw the name. I knew the name. She worked at his office. I had met her at the Christmas party 2 years in a row. She had shaken my hand. She had said, "It's so nice to finally meet you," and smiled at me with my husband standing right there. I put down the knife. I walked to the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub for a long time. Then I got up, finished the lunch, drove my daughter to school, and came home to figure out what I was going to do. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I know that's what people expect. The confrontation, the dramatic moment. But I had worked in financial analysis long enough to know that when something is wrong, the worst thing you can do is move before you understand what you're dealing with. So I spent 3 weeks watching, Not obsessively, not destructively. I still made dinner, I still drove to school pickups, I still smiled at the right moments, but I paid attention in a way I hadn't in years. What I found was worse than the affair. My husband had been quietly restructuring our finances for at least 18 months. Nothing illegal on its face. He was meticulous about that. But he had moved the bulk of our joint savings into accounts I didn't have access to. He had taken out a line of credit on our home using my signature, a signature I didn't remember signing, on a document I had never seen. The equity we had built together over 7 years had been repositioned methodically in a direction that pointed entirely toward his future and entirely away from mine. He wasn't just planning to leave me, he had been planning to leave me with nothing. I didn't confront him then either. I called my sister in Vancouver instead because she had a cooler head than I did and because I needed someone who would tell me the truth. She told me to find a lawyer. I tried. I called 4 different family law firms in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. The retainers started at $4,000. The least expensive one quoted me $800 for the initial consultation alone. I had a personal account with just over $2,000 in it, money I had been slowly setting aside from the household budget for 2 years, not because I was planning for divorce, but because some quiet part of me had learned not to feel completely secure. $2,000. Against a man who had already hidden significantly more than that. I called Legal Aid Ontario. I was told the wait was long, that my situation might not qualify given household income, that there were other resources I could look into. I looked into them. None of them moved fast enough for what was coming. Because I could see it coming. I knew my husband. I knew how he operated. He was about to pull the trigger on whatever exit he had been planning, and when he did, he was going to frame me as the unstable one, the one who couldn't handle finances, the one who had been out of the workforce for years and had nothing to contribute. I needed to move first. What I didn't tell my husband, what I had never told him because he had never asked with any real interest, was what I had actually done with my time since leaving my job. He thought I watched TV and drove to school pickups. The truth was that in the 3 years since our daughter started JK, I had been studying. I wasn't taking courses in early childhood education or hobby baking classes. I had been auditing law courses online through Osgood's professional development program, studying the Ontario Family Law Act on my own, reading case summaries late at night after our daughter went to bed. Not because I was planning any of this. I want to be clear about that. I was doing it because I had found, unexpectedly, that I loved it. The logic of it. The structure. The way that a well-made argument had its own kind of architecture. I wasn't a lawyer, I never claimed to be, but I understood family law procedure in Ontario better than most people who walked into a courtroom without representation. I knew the difference between an answer and a reply. I knew the financial disclosure requirements under the family law rules. I knew what a net family property statement looked like and what it meant when the numbers didn't add up. When I walked into that courthouse in Kitchener, I had filed my own documents correctly, cited the right statutes, and attached a 43-page financial disclosure package that I had spent 6 weeks assembling. My husband's lawyer had not expected that. The judge had not expected it either. The day my husband told me he wanted a divorce, he was not kind about it. I came home from picking up our daughter to find 2 green garbage bags in the front hallway. Not suitcases, garbage bags. The kind you use for yard waste. They were filled with my clothes. He was standing in the kitchen. She was not there, but her presence was everywhere. A coffee mug on the counter I didn't recognize. The kitchen smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. He said he had consulted a lawyer. He said the house would have to be sold, but that given my lack of income over the last several years, the division would reflect that. He said he had already spoken to someone about temporary custody arrangements. He said all of this in the tone of someone reading a statement, not someone ending a marriage. I asked him about the line of credit. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I asked him about the accounts. He said they were business related and none of my concern. I looked at the garbage bags in the hallway and I said, very quietly, that I would be staying in the house tonight, that our daughter was standing right behind me, that he was welcome to sleep in the guest room or make other arrangements. He laughed, not a small laugh, the same laugh he would use 3 months later in a courtroom. He said, "You can't even afford a lawyer. What exactly do you think you're going to do?" I picked up one of the garbage bags and carried it back upstairs. I didn't answer him because I was already thinking about what came next. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life, and also, in a strange way, the clearest. I had a purpose. I had a direction. I moved our daughter's routine into something stable and calm. Same school, same bedtime, same Saturday morning pancakes, so that whatever was happening between her parents, her world stayed predictable. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a triplex on a quiet street in Waterloo that the landlord agreed to rent month to month given the circumstances. I filed my own court documents. I served them correctly. I attended the mandatory information program. I did every single procedural step exactly as the rules required. My husband's lawyer called my cell twice to suggest I retain representation. The second time he said, and I'm quoting here because I wrote it down, "The complexity of the financial matters involved would be very difficult to navigate without professional guidance." He said it gently, not unkindly, but the implication was clear. You're in over your head. Please tap out. I said I appreciated the concern and that I'd see him at the case conference. He paused, then said he looked forward to it. My mother called me every other day. She wanted to help financially and couldn't. And the guilt of that came through in every conversation, even when she didn't say it out loud. She asked me if I was sure about doing this without a lawyer. I told her I was working on it. She said she trusted me and said a prayer for me, which was the most useful thing anyone said to me during those months. My sister flew in from Vancouver for the week before the hearing. She slept on an air mattress in the living room and spent most of the time keeping our daughter occupied so I could work. She didn't ask a lot of questions, she just showed up, and that was everything. The morning of the hearing, I woke up at 5 o'clock. I made coffee. I went through my documents one more time, not out of anxiety but as discipline, the same way you'd run a warm-up before something that mattered. Everything was in order. The net family property statement was cross-referenced with the bank records I had obtained through a disclosure request. The line of credit I had never signed was flagged with documentation from the bank that showed the signature did not match my other records, a detail I had spent 2 weeks getting a handwriting comparison analyst to put in writing. I drove to the courthouse. I parked on Frederick Street. I sat in the car for a few minutes and thought about my daughter, who was at school right now, who had eaten her sunflower butter sandwich, who had no idea what was happening today, and who would not be raised to believe she had no options just because someone told her so. Then I got out of the car and walked in. The courtroom was small and beige and smelled like old paper. My husband was already seated with his lawyer, a well-dressed man I recognized from his firm's website, the kind of lawyer whose hourly rates started at a number that would have ended this before it began if I'd tried to hire someone equivalent. My husband saw me walk in alone. That was when he laughed. His lawyer leaned over. They smiled. I set my folder on the table. I uncapped my pen. I did not look at him. The judge entered. We stood. She was in her early 50s, I estimated, sharp-eyed, unhurried, with the particular composure of someone who had heard everything. The first issue was my disclosure package. My husband's lawyer raised an objection about the handwriting evidence, suggesting it hadn't been properly introduced. I stood, cited the specific rule under the family law rules that govern the admission of third-party analysis reports, and noted that the document had been properly served 14 days prior to the hearing in compliance with the notice requirements. The judge looked at me. Then she looked at my husband's lawyer. She said, "Counsel, are you familiar with Rule 13? He said he was and withdrew the objection. It was a small moment, but the room changed slightly. The way rooms do when the thing you expect it to happen doesn't. My husband was not smiling anymore. The next 2 hours unfolded like a document being read aloud. Not dramatic, not loud, just methodical, the way that the truth tends to be when you've done the work to find it. The line of credit, the repositioned accounts, the business expenses that, on closer examination, aligned almost exactly with personal expenditures over an 18-month period. I had cross-referenced his company's incorporation records, which are public in Ontario, with the financial disclosure he had submitted to the court, a disclosure that had several notable gaps. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just walked through the numbers. I asked that the court order full financial disclosure for the numbered company he had incorporated 14 months earlier. I asked that the value of the matrimonial home be calculated, including the equity that had existed before the line of credit was placed on it. His lawyer asked for an adjournment, twice. The judge declined both requests. When we broke for 15 minutes, my husband crossed the room toward me. He was not laughing. His face had a color I had never seen on it before. Not anger exactly, more like the specific panic of someone who has just realized that the game they thought they were winning was being played on a different board entirely. He said, very quietly, "Where did you get all of this?" I said, "From the documents you were required by law to provide, and the ones you didn't provide, which I requested through other means." He said, "You should have told me you," and stopped. I said, "Told you what?" He didn't finish the sentence. The judge's ruling was not everything I had asked for. It never is, but it was substantial. The court ordered full disclosure of the numbered company's assets and financials. The line of credit was flagged as potentially invalid pending further review. The judge was careful about her language here, precise, but the implication was clear. The matrimonial home would be assessed at its value prior to the line of credit being placed on it. Spousal support was ordered at a rate reflecting my years out of the workforce and the specific circumstances of why I had left my career. A parenting schedule was established that prioritized our daughter's stability. His lawyer's face was very still by the end. The numbered company disclosure, it turned out, was the piece that kept pulling. 2 weeks after the hearing, his own accountant, a man my husband had trusted completely, provided documents to the court that showed a pattern of financial management that went well beyond what my husband had told him was the purpose of the company. I don't know exactly what happened in those conversations. I know that the accountant retained his own legal counsel. I know that my husband's lawyer withdrew from the file. I know that my husband called me one evening on a Tuesday when our daughter was asleep and his voice had lost everything it used to have in it. The confidence, the slight impatience, all of it gone. He sounded like someone standing in a place he had never expected to be. He didn't apologize, some people can't, but he asked me, genuinely asked me, how I had known to look where I looked, how I had known what I knew. I told him that I had been paying attention for a long time, that I had never stopped being the person I was before I married him, even when he had stopped seeing her. He didn't say anything after that. My daughter is 4 now. She starts senior kindergarten in September. On Saturday mornings, we make pancakes. She measures the mix, and I pour the batter, and she is very serious about the blueberry distribution, which I find both hilarious and admirable. My sister came back for a weekend last month, and the 3 of us walked along the trail by the Grand River, and my daughter collected rocks, which is her current obsession. And my sister held my hand for a minute and didn't say anything, and I understood exactly what she meant. I'm not the same person I was when I walked into that courthouse. That's not a dramatic thing to say, it's just true. Something settles in you when you've stood in a room where someone expected you to have nothing and you showed up with everything you needed. You stop waiting for permission. You stop apologizing for knowing things. My mother calls twice a week now. She still asks how I'm doing. I still say fine, and I mostly mean it. She prayed for me every day during those months, and I think she prayed hard enough for both of us. I am applying to Osgood's JD program next fall. I don't know if I'll get in. I've been out of a formal academic context for a while, and the application is not straightforward. But I know the material. I've known it for a long time. He told me I couldn't afford a lawyer. He didn't think to ask whether I needed one. There's a particular kind of silence that happens in a room when something goes differently than everyone expected. Not a dramatic silence, not the kind you see in movies. It's quieter than that. It's the sound of people recalculating. I've thought about that moment a lot, not with satisfaction exactly, more with a kind of clarity I didn't have before. What I keep coming back to is this. My husband didn't lose because I was smarter than him. He lost because of the choices he made and the choices I made and the way those two sets of choices met each other in that courtroom. He chose to underestimate me. He chose to believe that the years I had spent at home meant I had stopped thinking, stopped learning, stopped being someone with her own interior life. He chose to move money, hide assets, and sign documents in my name, and then he chose to laugh when I walked in alone. Every one of those choices had a cost. They always do. Not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense, but because actions have consequences that are real and traceable and eventual. He built his exit strategy on the assumption that I was less than I was. That assumption was the crack in the foundation. Everything else followed from there. And my choices, the late nights with case summaries, the hours studying legislation I had no immediate use for, the decision to stay calm when every part of me wanted to fall apart, those had consequences too. I didn't know, when I was auditing those law courses at 11 o'clock at night while my daughter slept, that I was preparing for this. I was just following something that felt true to who I was. But that's how it works, I think. You don't always know what you're building until you need it. The thing I want to say, if you're somewhere in the middle of something hard right now, is that none of what I did required exceptional talent. It required honesty with myself, about my situation, about what I actually knew and what I needed to learn. It required the willingness to keep thinking clearly when everything around me was designed to make me feel small, and it required showing up, repeatedly, even when I wasn't sure it would be enough. Those three things, being honest about who you are, refusing to stop thinking, and continuing to show up, those aren't dramatic. They don't make for a good movie, but they're what actually changed the outcome of my life. My daughter is 4. She doesn't know any of this yet. Someday I'll tell her, in whatever version feels right for her age. What I hope she takes from it isn't that her mother won. It's that her mother didn't stop. That when someone told her she had nothing, she looked at what she actually had and figured out what to do with it. That's all I did, and it turned out to be enough.